the Centre for Excellence school masterclasses. And Max, of course, knows the media school pretty well because his daughter graduated from here about a dozen years ago, so he knows us reasonably, and it's good of him to come back. Now, as most of you will know, Max is the UK's best-known publicist and a consummate media manipulator. After a confessed false start in the job market, he found himself in journalism, but then he moved across fairly quickly into the pop world, joining EMI as a press and publicity man. And I think one of his first jobs was promoting the Beatles. Right, was it? Yeah. He then broadened his horizons and began to represent celebrities of any description, including Frank Sinatra, Muhammad Ali, David Copperfield, Freddie Starr, and infamously O.J. Simpson. If you name an individual who's been involved in a high-profile news story in recent years, then more often than not, Max Clifford is somewhere there in the background. And while he is, or maybe was, a Labour supporter and an admirer of Tony Blair, that didn't stop him a few years ago tipping off the media that Sherry was pregnant. He's been involved in many kiss and tell stories sold to newspapers. Earlier this year, Max represented John Prescott's diary secretary, Tracy Temple, in selling her story for, quote, an awful lot more than £100,000 to the Mail on Sunday.
350,000.
350,000, they are. To the Mail on Sunday about their 2-year affair. And he was also involved with the David Beckham and the Rebecca Luce revelations last year. But Mr. Clifford is a much more complex character than just a purveyor of sleaze, as many of his victims would brand him.
David Mellor, actually, he was the only one.
He was the one who said it, wasn't he? Yeah.
Nice man.
While he makes a very good living for his business, what motivates him is much more than just money. He can't stand hypocrisy in public life, and he reserves a particular disgust for lying politicians. He also applies his own standards and code of practice when deciding which stories he's prepared to take on. He says he's broken scandals on many politicians, but he could have broken 30 or 40 more, but held back because he didn't think that what they were doing was that wrong. He sometimes works for free, as he does in the case of those he feels are victims of tabloid harassment, people who can't defend themselves. Max Clifford's a man of great contrast, ruthless in his pursuit of gaining his client publicity, yet a caring and thoughtful man who devotes a lot of time and money to assisting charities and those less fortunate. I've asked Max if he'll talk about media and celebrity and how they each needs and feeds off the other, and he's also happy afterwards to take questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, Max Clifford.
If I'm a bit hoarse, it's because I've been speaking for an hour and a half at a charity lunch at Bournemouth for disabled children. So hopefully the voice will hold out long enough to answer your questions. For me, public relations, I'm not a publicist, I'm a PR. The biggest part of my business is not creating media attention, it's stopping it, controlling it, diverting it, hiding it. Creating campaigns for individuals, for companies, banks, institutions, property companies, fashion, health, beauty, television, entertainment, sport. We have a very small company, but we handle the lot. We're the only PR company properly in this country that has never ever had to pitch for business. The reason for that, if you get results, then they come chasing you. And the advantage of that, when you're dealing with stars who have huge egos, and if they're not when they start out, rapidly become, most of them, legends in their own mind, is that when they come to you, you're in control. You need them less than they need you, and they know that. So they tend to listen and they tend to act most of the time the way you want them to. If they don't, there's no point in you being involved because you can't do the job. Unlike you lot, who are all incredibly gifted academics, I left school at 15 with absolutely no qualifications at all. I think my career's advice at 15 was, if your dad's in the print, go into printing. If he's not in the print, you can't do that, you just have to find something else. That was it. I worked at a departmental store, didn't suit me at all because people talk down to you, and I never liked that. And I think I got sacked after a year for being rude to some old lady that was pretty rude to me, but okay, so you to think you should put up with that. Well, I wasn't prepared to. I got a job on the local papers as a trainee reporter, purely because of water polo. I played water polo, I played football as a youngster, and the sports editor of the South London News Group, which was where I lived, in Wimbledon, near Wimbledon, used to get me to do match reports on water polo, football matches I was playing in around the country. He paid me a few shillings and I could write anything I wanted and maintain I had a wonderful game, even if I was dreadful. So it suited me down to the ground. I quickly discovered that there was an opportunity if you're involved in the media. This was late 50s, I mean, totally different world to the world that we live in today. And I started a record column on my paper, which was part of a local news group which went over South London area, just to get free records. And then I opened a disco, played these free records, got the room free of charge by putting the publican in the paper occasionally, because he liked to have his photo in the paper. So he let me have the room for nothing, the records cost nothing. And I was making 3 or 4 times my salary as a young journalist from the disco. I then used to sell all the review copies I got from all the different record companies, which of course I wasn't meant to do, but that meant I was earning 5 or 6 times my salary as a journalist from other activities. In other words, I was ducking and diving from an early age because it came naturally and instinctively to me, and I've done that ever since. Public relations is a wonderful industry to be in at this particular time in recent years, simply because image is everything today. Reality is ever more distant. When you read newspapers, when you read magazines, when you watch the news, it's ever more difficult to know actually what's really going on because everybody is spinning. What's interesting is that public relations is often attacked by journalists because of spin. The reality of it is that what most upsets journalists is that sometimes you can counteract the spin that they're trying to put on whatever they're writing, because they're all at it. Most of my business over the last 40 years has been entertainment. We launched the Beatles when they were unknown, right at the beginning. There was no public relations industry in this country then. We were press officers, and it was all then about publicity. We launched Clifford, we launched Adam and Faith, who your mums or grandmothers would remember. We then, this is 62, I was 19, so your age or around that time. We then got approached by 2 lads came over from Detroit in the States called Berry Gordy and Smokey Robinson, and they had a record label called Tamla Motown. EMI decided yes, just about, and we launched the careers in Europe of people like Stevie Wonder, the Jackson 5, Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye, the Four Tops, Temptations, Gladys Knight, people like that. Subsequently, the chief press officer at EMI left to form his own company and took me with him. And I rapidly learned that if you looked after stars, celebrities, you could promote anything at all. If I took one of the Beatles to a restaurant, that restaurant was front page news. If I took the Beatles or any of the big Motown stars into a club, that club got massive coverage. So after leaving EMI, because the chief press officer left to form his own company, he took me with him. And we launched the careers of people like Tom Jones and Engelbert Humperdinck, the Bee Gees, Cream. I also did PR for a small music festival called Woodstock, which did quite well. And it was generally the right time in the right place. It was an incredibly exciting time. I had no training at all. I mean, you lot, I've got wonderful training, theory. There's no substitute for practice, but theory is a great start. Everybody that works for me has got degrees, and that's wonderful. But it takes me 3, 4, 5 years to actually teach them then how to do the job, and it goes on from there. Because it's an ever-changing, fascinating world, public relations and image making. As I say, when I started, it was all about